My name is Delaney, and I am 29 years old. When I pulled into the driveway of my grandmother's Muskoka property on Christmas Eve, I was expecting the smell of pine and the sound of the gas fireplace crackling through a half-open window. Instead, I drove 4.5 hours through whiteout conditions on the 400 only to find a dark house, a locked side door, and a single, sticky note on the kitchen counter in my mother's handwriting. They had gone to Whistler. All of them. My mother, my stepfather, my half-brother Caden. They had packed their ski gear and their expensive luggage and boarded a flight to British Columbia without telling me. The note said my grandmother had been having a rough week with her memory, that she needed someone to keep an eye on her, and that there was soup in the freezer. Have a good Christmas, Delaney. Don't forget her afternoon medication. I stood in Granby's kitchen reading that note under the flicker of the under-cabinet lights, still wearing my coat and snow-crusted boots, with the bitter cold coming through the window above the sink. I had taken a full week off work. I had driven through a blizzard. I had stopped at the Timmy's outside of Barrie to pick up her favorite Boston cream because it was the only thing that reliably made her smile lately. The box sat on the counter beside the note, a pathetic little peace offering for a woman I hadn't even known was alone. What happened during the week that followed would dismantle everything I thought I understood about my family. And within 7 days, the people who had abandoned us would be returning home to a very different world than the one they left behind. I need to explain something before I tell you what I found. My mother remarried when I was 11, a man named Reg, who came with a company car, strong opinions about wine, and a son from a previous marriage named Caden. Caden was 8 at the time. He is now 26, and in the years since he has somehow become the son my mother never had, and the presumptive heir to my grandmother's estate, despite sharing absolutely no blood with her whatsoever. I am Granby's only biological grandchild. I worked my way through Carleton on student loans because Reg convinced my mother that good kids earn their own way. I became a certified fraud examiner working with a boutique law firm in Ottawa that specializes in estate disputes and financial elder abuse. I spend my days finding money that has been hidden, moved, or quietly stolen from people who are too trusting or too tired to notice it's gone. I am very good at my job. To my mother and Reg, this was always treated as a glorified hobby. At every family dinner, Reg would make some version of the same joke. Still chasing paper trails, Delaney? He said it the way people say cute when they mean inconsequential. Caden would smirk. My mother would change the subject. My grandmother never changed the subject. Granby had been a bookkeeper for 40 years before she retired. She understood exactly what my work meant. Which is why, when I went looking for her in that dark house on Christmas Eve, I was not at all prepared for what I found. She was in the sitting room, in her wingback chair facing the window that overlooks the frozen lake. The whole room smelled like cedar closet and the faint trace of her hand cream, the same green tea scent she'd used for as long as I could remember. I had her medication in my jacket pocket, the prescription bottle my mother had left beside the note, along with a photocopied list of instructions written in Reg's handwriting, clinical and cold. The last 7 months had been genuinely painful to watch. Granby had always been sharp. She was the person who remembered every birthday, who balanced her checkbook to the cent, who could quote you the current interest rate on her G's without looking it up. But starting in the spring, she had begun to slip. Forgetting words, repeating questions, getting confused about what year it was. The doctor had said it was early-stage cognitive decline, and my mother had moved quickly after that, getting herself added to Gran's bank accounts, taking over her power of attorney, gently steering her away from any conversation that involved money. I hadn't liked it, but I hadn't known what to do about it. I walked into the sitting room carefully, the way you approach someone who might startle. I said her name softly. I told her it was me, that it was Christmas Eve, that I had driven up from Ottawa. My grandmother turned from the window. And the woman looking back at me was not the woman I had spent 7 months grieving. Her eyes were completely clear, not foggy, not distant, not searching for a word that wouldn't come. They were sharp and dark and entirely focused, and they swept past me to check the doorway behind me the way a person checks to confirm they are alone. Did they actually leave? She asked. Her voice was low and steady, like someone who had been holding their breath for a very long time. I couldn't speak for a moment. I just stared at her. She sat up straighter in her chair, and the fragile, diminished posture she had worn for months dissolved completely. She looked like herself again, the woman who had taught me to read a balance sheet before I could drive. Gran, I managed. Do you know who I am? I have always known who you are, she said. Sit down, sweetheart. I have been waiting for this. She had not been losing her mind, she had been performing. 7 months of shuffled steps and blank stares and repeated questions, all of it deliberate, all of it sustained because she needed them to believe she had already slipped away. She needed them to get comfortable. She needed them to stop being careful. She told me it had started with a discrepancy in her RRSP statements, a transfer she had not authorized, small enough that a person not paying close attention might miss it, but Gran had been paying attention to money for longer than my mother had been alive. She brought it up with Reg, and he had an explanation ready within 30 seconds. Administrative correction. The bank had sorted it. Nothing to worry about. She worried. She said nothing and watched. Over the following months, she noticed that the second opinion she had asked for on her investment portfolio never materialized. She noticed that Reg had begun yucking himself on correspondence from her financial advisor. She noticed that Caden had started showing up more often, always with some excuse to be in the room when anything financial was discussed, always so solicitous, always so helpful. And then she noticed that the property tax notice for her Toronto condo had been redirected to a different address. I couldn't fight them openly, she told me. If I pushed, they would have moved faster. Reg is not a stupid man. He would have found a way to have me declared incompetent before I could get anyone to listen. But if they believed I was already gone, she paused, folding her hands in her lap, they would stop being careful. She reached under the seat cushion of her wingback chair and pulled out a small tablet in a plain black case. I have been building the file for 5 months, she said, but I need you to look at it. I need someone who knows what they are looking for. I sat down across from her and I opened the file. What I found over the next 2 hours was not a discrepancy, it was a systematic dismantling. Reg had been drawing from Gran's non-registered investment accounts, the ones she had built over 4 decades through her bookkeeping income, and routing the withdrawals through a numbered company registered in Alberta. The withdrawals were logged as management fees. There was no management agreement on file, there was no service being provided. The money was simply leaving her account, passing through the numbered company, and disappearing into a joint account in Reg and my mother's names. I pulled up the land registry records through my firm's remote access portal and felt the floor drop out from under me. Gran, I said, did you sign a second mortgage on this property last March? She looked at me steadily. I did not. I turned the tablet toward her and showed her the document. Her own signature, notarized, authorizing a $250,000 mortgage against the property we were sitting in. The one her parents had built in 1971. The one she had paid off completely by 1998. She looked at the signature for a long time. That's Caden's version of my handwriting, she said quietly. He practiced it for months. I watched him do it at the kitchen table thinking he was just doodling. We sat with that for a moment. There's more, I said, your Toronto condo. There was a listing agreement in the file, recent, signed with the same forged hand, directing the sale proceeds to the Alberta numbered company. The listing had gone live 11 days ago. I checked the MLS record on my phone. An offer had been accepted. Gran closed her eyes briefly. That condo had been her home for 18 years before she moved to Muskoka full-time. She still kept a spare key on her ring out of habit. How long do we have? She asked. I checked the timestamps on the conveyancing documents. The closing is scheduled for January 3rd, I said. Just over a week. If we don't stop it, the proceeds go directly into their account and there is nothing left to trace. She opened her eyes. Then we don't have a week to waste. My phone buzzed on the table. Caden's name lit up the screen. Gran looked at it and then at me. Put it on speaker, she said. I want to hear him. I answered. Caden did not say hello. Caden never says hello. It would imply the other person's time has equal value. My card's been flagged for some weird transaction, and I can't get through to the bank until after Boxing Day, he said. His voice carrying the particular texture of someone who has never had to ask for anything twice. I need you to e-transfer me $3,000 from Gran's account. She's got her TD checking linked on the tablet. Just do it tonight and I'll square it up when we're back. I looked at my grandmother. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded, her face giving away nothing. Her tablet, I said. How do you know what's on her tablet? A pause. She showed me when I helped her set it up. She didn't set it up, I did 6 months ago, and it doesn't have TD Checkwing linked to it. Another pause longer. Look, I don't need a whole situation about this, I just need the money. For what? There's a jewelry place in Whistler Village doing Boxing Week sales. I want to get Mum a necklace. It's not a big deal, Delaney. The money's basically mine anyway. It all comes to me eventually. I looked at my grandmother again. Her expression had not shifted, but her jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly, and I watched her look down at her own hands. Hands that had kept meticulous books for 4 decades, that had built the very accounts Caden was now treating as his personal reserve. It comes to you eventually, I repeated. You know what I mean. Gran's not going to be around forever. The estate's already managed by Dad, basically, so. Her estate is managed by her, I said. She is alive, Caden. She is sitting 4 feet away from me right now, and I am not transferring her money to you for Boxing Week jewelry. Call your actual bank. He hung up without another word. Granbia let out a long, slow breath. He's been saying that for months, she said. It all comes to me eventually. He said it to your mother in the kitchen last August. He didn't know I was in the hallway. We drove into Huntsville that night through fresh snow to the office of Gran Bay's longtime estate lawyer. A quiet, meticulous man named Mr. Lefebvre who had drafted her original will in 2003 and updated it twice since. Gran Bay had called him from her landline before we left, using the voice she had been carefully concealing for 7 months. He had asked no questions over the phone, he simply told us he would be there. He was unlocking the front door of his office when we pulled into the parking lot. He took one look at my grandmother, standing upright, clear-eyed, moving with the purposeful certainty of someone who has been waiting a long time to act, and he pressed his hand briefly over his mouth. Beatrice, he said, the word came out rough. I know, she said, I'll explain everything inside. We spent 4 hours at his desk. I laid out the paper trail piece by piece, the unauthorized withdrawals routed through the Alberta numbered company, the forged mortgage on the Muskoka property, the condo listing, the power of attorney obtained last April under circumstances I could now document in detail. Mr. Lefebvre sat very still through most of it, only moving to make notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he looked at Granbia. The power of attorney, did you sign it voluntarily? I signed it under significant pressure, she said. Reg told me it was standard estate planning. He had the documents drawn up by someone I'd never met in my own kitchen with my daughter present. I signed because I was afraid that if I didn't, the next conversation would be about care homes. Mr. Lefebvre set down his pen. Then it's voidable. Given what Delaney has documented, I can make a strong argument for immediate revocation on the grounds of undue influence. He turned to me. The condo closing is the most urgent matter. If that sale goes through, the money is gone. Tracing it through the numbered company will take months, and they'll move it long before we have an order. I know, I said. We need to stop the closing before January 3rd. I can file an emergency application in Superior Court, he said. I'll need an affidavit from Beatrice establishing her capacity, and your forensic analysis attached as a supporting exhibit. And I'll need a judge willing to hear an urgent motion during the holiday recess. Granba straightened in her chair. Then let's not waste any more of the evening. I drafted the financial analysis until 2 in the morning, pulling data from the tablet files and cross-referencing it against CRA records and the Alberta Corporate Registry. The numbered company had been incorporated 18 months ago, almost to the day, 2 months before the first unauthorized transfer. Reg had planned this before the power of attorney was even signed. Mr. Lefebvre filed the emergency application on Boxing Day morning. A judge granted an interim hearing for December 28th, one of the few sitting days during the holiday recess. The evidence we submitted was, in Mr. Lefebvre's words, unusually clean. Clean because Granbea had spent 5 months quietly building it, and because I had spent 3 days organizing it into something a court could follow in a single afternoon. The interim injunction came through on December 29th. The condo sale was frozen pending a full hearing. The real estate agent called my mother in Whistler to inform her the transaction had been halted by court order. I know this because my mother called me 14 minutes later. I didn't answer. In the days that followed, Mr. Lefebvre's firm worked to formally revoke the power of attorney and establish a new trust structure, one in which I was named sole trustee of an inter vivos trust holding the Muskoka property and Gran's remaining investment accounts. The forged mortgage was registered with the Land Titles Office as a disputed instrument. The Alberta Numbered Company was referred to the RCMP's Financial Crimes Unit. By New Year's Eve, the house was warm. We had turned the heat up to exactly what Gran wanted. We had lit the fireplace, we had eaten the Boston cream donuts on Christmas morning 2 days late, at the kitchen table with the frozen lake going silver in the early light. They came back on the 2nd of January. I saw the rental SUV before I heard it, headlights sweeping across the ceiling of the front room through the big windows. Gran set down her tea without being asked. She knew the way she had known everything. I watched from the window as my stepfather climbed out of the driver's side and stretched his arms above his head. My mother followed in her white ski jacket, talking before her boots hit the driveway. Caden came last, pulling a duffel bag from the back hatch with the easy indifference of someone who has never really had to carry anything very far. My stepfather walked up the front steps and tried his key. The locks had been rekeyed 6 days ago. He tried again. He tried a third time with force. Then he stepped back and looked at the door as if it had personally offended him. My mother tried her key. Same result. Caden stepped up, tried his own, then noticed the new hardware and tapped it with one finger. He said something to my stepfather. My stepfather said something back. My mother called my name toward the front windows. I opened the door and stepped outside. I stood at the top of the steps and looked down at the 3 of them on the driveway. My stepfather wore the professionally composed expression of a man deciding how angry he is permitted to be. My mother looked confused and cold. Caden, for the first time I could ever remember, looked genuinely uncertain. "What is going on?" my stepfather said, controlled, reasonable, the voice he used when he wanted to sound like the adult in the room. "You won't be able to come in," I said. My mother stepped forward. "Delaney, it's -15 and I have been traveling since this morning." "You left Gran alone on Christmas Eve," I said. "You wrote a note on a sticky note and you went to the airport." I looked at my stepfather. "I also found your numbered company." The controlled expression went very still. "I found the withdrawals routed through the Alberta Numbered Company," I continued. "I found the forged mortgage on this property. I found the power of attorney that was obtained under circumstances a court has already described as raising serious concerns about undue influence. And I found the condo listing, which is currently subject to an interim injunction issued by the Ontario Superior Court on December 29th. Caden took a step back on the ice and nearly went down. "You have no idea what you're talking about," my stepfather said. The crack in his voice was widening. "Beatrice's affairs are under my management by legal authorization. Whatever you think you've found." "The power of attorney has been formally revoked," I said. "Her estate is held in trust. You are not an authorized signatory on any of her accounts and you haven't been since December 27th. I held out a folded envelope. "Mr. Lefebvre asked me to give you this. It's a notice to vacate the property, 72 hours. He didn't take it, he stared at it. "I'm calling the police," Caden said, pulling out his phone. His voice had gone high and brittle. "You can't just do this. This is our home." "It is Gran's home," I said. "It has always been Gran's home." He was already dialing. He told the dispatcher that his stepsister had changed the locks and was holding their grandmother against her will, that there was a serious mental health situation developing, that innocent people were being kept out in dangerous cold. He gave the address. He asked for immediate assistance. He looked at me when he hung up with the expression of someone accustomed to problems resolving themselves once the right people are summoned. I waited. The OPP cruiser came up the drive 11 minutes later. 2 officers stepped out into the cold and walked up the front steps. I stepped aside and handed the lead officer the folder. The injunction, the revocation notice, and the formal complaint summary filed with the RCMP's Financial Crimes Unit under the Criminal Code provisions for fraud over $5,000, forgery, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. She read through it, then she looked at my stepfather. She read his full legal name from the document and asked if that was him. He said yes. His voice had lost all its control by then. "I'm going to need you to come with me," she said. Caden started talking immediately, too fast, too much, the words stumbling over each other. He said it was a misunderstanding. He said his father had Gran's full permission for everything. He said I was unstable, that I had a history of making things difficult for the family, that any court documents I had filed had been done without Granbia's genuine understanding. The second officer asked him to stop speaking. My mother was very quiet. She stood in the driveway with her ski jacket open despite the temperature, watching the officer guide my stepfather toward the cruiser, and her face held the specific expression of someone who has just understood that a bridge they assumed was solid has been gone for some time. "Delaney," she said. Just my name, no screaming, a flatness to it I had never heard from her before. "You wrote a note," I said. "You left it on the counter and you went to the airport. That was the choice you made." I held her gaze for a moment. "Granbia is inside, she is fine, she has been fine this whole time, but I think you always knew she was capable of more than she was showing, and I think you chose not to look too closely at why." I went back inside. Gran B was in the kitchen. She had made tea, loose leaf in the pot she kept at the back of the cupboard, the one she brought out when something mattered. She set a cup on the counter in front of me and didn't say anything for a while. Through the window we could see the OPP cruiser's taillights disappearing down the driveway. "Your mother is still outside," Granbia said eventually. "I know." She wrapped both hands around her own cup. "She's going to have a very hard time ahead of her." She made choices. Granbia nodded slowly. "She did." A pause. "So did I. For a long time I let things happen I should have stopped sooner." She looked at me. "Thank you for coming on Christmas Eve even when you had no idea what you were walking into." "I came for you," I said. "I always come for you." The full investigation took the better part of 6 months. The RCMP Financial Crimes Unit worked from the documentation I had organized, along with records subpoenaed from the Alberta Corporate Registry and Granbia's financial institutions. The picture that emerged was methodical. Reg had been moving money for nearly 2 years, small enough amounts at first that automated monitoring hadn't flagged it, escalating steadily once the power of attorney was secured. In total, he had taken just over $380,000. Caden had done the forgeries. His handwriting practice had left a recoverable digital record on a tablet that wasn't his. He had used Gran B's device to practice her signature and had never cleared the stylus history. My firm's forensic software pulled every stroke. They were charged jointly. The Crown proceeded on fraud over $5,000, forgery, and breach of a fiduciary duty toward a vulnerable adult under the Criminal Code. The sentencing happened on a Thursday morning in Brampton, and I sat beside Granbia in the front row. My stepfather received 4 years less a day, served provincially, with full restitution ordered as a condition of any parole eligibility. Caden received 22 months, with a permanent record of the forgery convictions. My mother was not charged. The Crown found insufficient evidence that she had known the specific mechanics of what Reg had been doing. Mr. Lefebvre had explained the likely outcome to me months before the trial, so I had time to make my peace with it, or something close enough to peace that I could sit in that courtroom without coming apart. She moved into a rental apartment in Barrie after the Muskoka property was formally transferred to the trust. She called me twice. I answered the second time. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing that mattered, and I said I would call her back, and I haven't yet, and I might. I am still deciding. What I have decided is this. Granbia is still in the wingback chair when the morning light is good. She has picked up her crossword habit again. The Globe and Mail every morning with black coffee, the way she did for decades before any of this began. She quotes interest rates unprompted. She remembers every birthday. She never had cognitive decline. She had a plan, and she had enough faith in me to wait until the right moment to share it. In February she called me into the sitting room and told me she had spoken with Mr. Lefebvre about amending the trust. She wanted me to be more than the trustee. I want you to be the beneficiary, she said. Not after I'm gone, now. I want you to have the authority to make decisions about this estate while I'm still here to see you make them. I sat across from her in the same chair I had sat on Christmas Eve. The lake outside the window was still frozen solid, the last gray week of winter. This is your home, I said. It will still be my home, she said. But it will be protected by someone who earned the right to protect it. Not someone who inherited it by default, not someone who married into proximity to it. She reached over and put her hand over mine. You drove 4.5 hours through a blizzard to check on me. You sat in a lawyer's office until 2 in the morning on Christmas night. You did the right thing at the hardest possible time. She pressed my hand once firmly. This family spent a long time underestimating you, she said. I never did, and I need you to stop being surprised by what happens when that turns out to matter. I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. Outside, the ice on the lake was beginning to show the faint gray rings of a late thaw, the particular quality of February light that means the worst has already passed, even if spring is still weeks away. The greatest thing that winter taught me is something I already knew but had never quite believed. The people who dismiss what you do are often most frightened of what happens when you use it. My stepfather called my work tedious. Caden never thought about it at all. They looked at a fraud examiner and saw a woman with a boring job who would do what she was told. They left me alone in a dark house with a grandmother they had spent months underestimating, a tablet full of evidence, and every professional skill I had spent 8 years building. They gave me exactly what I needed. If you have ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to believe in you, I would love to hear your story in the comments below. And if this one resonated with you, please subscribe. There are more here for you.